You're looking at a porch light in a town whose name will not matter until it does, and 41 motorcycles are idling in the street like they have all night to wait, because they do. Count them if you want. Count the chrome catching what's left of a September sky, the exhaust ghosting up into air that still smells like cut grass, and somebody's charcoal grill 3 yards over, like nothing at all is happening. A girl of about 10 is standing on the porch boards in sneakers so new the box crease still shows across the toe. One of them doesn't match the other, a small thing, the kind of detail a person notices only when they've been trained to notice small things. Her right wrist is wrapped in gauze, clean and white, and the porch light finds it every time she moves, which isn't often. She has the stillness of someone who learned a long time ago that stillness is safer than almost anything else a body can do. A man kneels down in front of her. He's not a small man. His knees crack loud enough that a few of the riders behind him almost smile and don't. He has a beard gone gray at the jaw and forearms roped with faded ink and old scar tissue, the kind of hands that have fixed 1,000 engines and broken exactly as many knuckles doing it, and none of that matters to her at all. What matters is that he is at her eye level now, patient, waiting, the way you wait for a spooked animal or a grieving man, without asking twice. She looks at him for a long moment, then she tells him her name, not the one she'd been giving out for 11 days to anyone who asked, her real one. It will take the rest of this story to explain why 41 grown men on motorcycles came to sit outside a rented clapboard house on a warm evening in September, and why one of them was on his knees on a stranger's porch listening to a child's whisper like it was the only sound left in the world. It will take going back to before the gauze, before the sneakers, before anyone in that town knew her name at all. Back to a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days earlier, when the temperature sat close to 100. And the only sound in a certain salvage yard was cicadas, and the tick of cooling metal, and a man who had spent 20 years minding nobody's business but his own looked up from an engine block and saw a barefoot girl standing at his fence line, not asking for anything, just watching him work like she was deciding something. That was where it started. Stay with it. It gets harder before it gets good. 11 days earlier, before any of it, he was just a man with grease under his nails and a business that was dying slower than most things in that county, but dying all the same. He was 58 years old, built like something poured rather than born. Wide through the shoulders, thick through the neck, the kind of frame that had once carried a rucksack up mountains in a country most of his neighbors couldn't find on a map. 3 tours. He didn't talk about them, and nobody in town asked any more, not since the year he'd stopped answering when they did. What remained of that time lived in his hands, steady, deliberate hands that could read a stripped bolt or a bad transmission the way other men read faces. He'd been running the salvage yard on the county road for going on 20 years, ever since the discharge papers and a small loan turned into 3 acres of stacked cars and a chain link fence that had rusted the color of dried blood. The yard wasn't much: cracked concrete, a tin roofed office that cooked in summer and froze in winter, rows of dead trucks sinking slowly into the weeds like something being reclaimed by the ground itself. He kept it running on parts orders and patience, on the kind of stubbornness that didn't announce itself. He still owed $11,000 on his late wife's hospital bills, 2 years gone now, and the number came down slower than he liked to admit, a little, each month, like paying off a debt to a ghost. Her photograph sat on the shelf above his workbench, curling at one corner from the heat. Since she died, he had exactly one rule, and he'd kept it the way some men keep scripture. He did not get involved in other people's business, not the Petersons' custody fight 2 farms over, not the rumors about the preacher's son, not the trucks that came and went from the rental house past the county line at hours that made no sense for a house with no woodshop or garden to explain them. He had learned it the hard way, in places far from that dirt road, that a man who inserted himself into other people's wars usually just added his own name to the list of the wounded. He'd buried enough men believing otherwise. He wasn't going to bury himself in a strip of Georgia clay over somebody else's trouble. So when he looked up from the engine block that Tuesday afternoon, wiping his hands on a rag gone stiff with oil, and saw her standing at the fence, small, still, barefoot in grass that should have blistered anyone's feet by that hour, his first instinct, the 20-year-old instinct, the only rule he had left, told him to go back to the engine and let her walk on. He did not go back to the engine. The yard sat at the edge of a town that had stopped pretending it was coming back. Black Ridge, the sign said, though half the letters had rusted through so it read more like a warning than a name. One traffic light blinked yellow at all hours. The diner on Main kept a sign in the window that buzzed and stuttered, open, flickering into something closer to 10 by 9 most nights. And nobody bothered fixing it, because nobody came in past 9 anyway. The gas station had gone dark 2 summers back. What remained was heat, the kind that sat on a man's shoulders like a second shirt that rose in visible ribbons off the hoods, and roofs of dead cars stacked 3 high behind chain link that made the cicadas scream louder as the afternoon wore on, a sound so constant it disappeared into the background of thought until it stopped, and then a man noticed the silence more than he'd ever noticed the noise. He had built the yard himself, 22 years of engine blocks and quarter panels and doors that no longer opened onto anything, rows of cars sorted by make the way some men sorted their grief. Fords here, Chevys there, the foreign makes nobody wanted shoved into the back corner where the kudzu was already reclaiming their windshields. The gravel lot baked white under the sun. His shirt clung to his spine by noon most days. He worked with the radio off, because he liked the sound of tools against metal better than any voice, and because a man alone with his hands didn't have to explain himself to anybody, not even himself. She had been there Sunday, too. He hadn't let himself think much of it then, a shape at the tree line past the fence, gone before he'd set the wrench down. Monday, she'd come closer, close enough that he could tell she was young, maybe 9 or 10. Wearing a dress too big through the shoulders, and that her feet were bare on ground that should have cooked them. He'd called out once, just hey, nothing more, and she'd vanished into the pines like something that had never been solid to begin with. Now it was Tuesday, and she hadn't run. She stood with both hands wrapped around the top rail of the chain link, knuckles pale, watching him the way a deer watches a truck it hasn't decided is dangerous yet. Her hair was dark and matted at the temple like she'd slept without turning over. There was a strip of gauze wound twice around her left wrist, gray with dirt, the kind of dressing nobody had changed in days. He set the rag on the fender. The cicadas kept screaming. Somewhere behind him an engine block ticked as it cooled, and somewhere past that, out on the state road, a truck he didn't recognize slowed near the rental house before it accelerated on toward the county line. And he found he was already counting how many afternoons this made, and already hating that he was counting at all. He didn't move toward her right away. 31 years wrenching bolts off rusted frames had taught him that anything wild bolts if you come at it square. So he turned his shoulders sideways, the way he'd learned to walk up on a spooked horse, back when he still did that kind of work, and let his boots find the ground slow, one scrape of gravel at a time. She didn't run. That alone told him something. Up close, the dress was worse than he'd registered from the trailer window. A faded floral thing, buttons missing at the collar, hem stiff with something dried brown that might have been mud, and might not have been. It hung off her like she'd borrowed it from a woman twice her size. Her collarbones stood out sharp above the neckline. Along her jaw, just under the ear, a bruise had gone from purple to that sick yellow-green color that meant a week, maybe more, had passed since it was new. He stopped Anne, arm's length from the fence. "You hungry?" She didn't answer. Her eyes went to his hands, then back to his face, cataloging him the way he'd catalog an engine he didn't trust yet. Where the danger might be hiding, what part might not hold. He crouched, slow, so he wasn't standing over her, and reached through the gap where the chain link had rusted loose at the post, meaning only to offer the granola bar sitting forgotten in his shirt pocket since breakfast. His hand passed near her wrist. She flinched back so hard she nearly lost her footing, one bare heel skidding in the dirt, both arms crossing over her middle so the left wrist tucked out of sight against her ribs, the gauze catching the light for just a second before it disappeared under her elbow. Gray gauze, wound twice, maybe 3 times. Not a hospital dressing, no tape edge, no clean fold. Something wrapped in a hurry by someone who didn't know how or didn't care to. I wasn't going to touch it, he said, and kept his voice flat, the way he'd talk down a man coming off a bad tour. No sudden softness in it, because sudden softness read as a trick to anyone who'd learned the hard way that kindness came with strings. She watched him a long moment. The cicadas dropped off all at once, the way they did sometimes, like the whole field had inhaled, and in that quiet she said the first words he'd hear out of her, so soft he almost missed them under the tick of the cooling engine block behind him. "You're not supposed to see that." He didn't ask what that was. He didn't need to yet. He only nodded, slow, like she'd told him something about the weather, and held the granola bar out flat on his palm, farther from her wrist this time, and waited, the way he'd wait for anything worth waiting for, while somewhere out past the tree line a screen door banged shut at the rental house and nobody came outside to call her name. She took the granola bar the way an animal takes food from a hand it does not trust. A quick dart, a retreat, the whole motion compressed into less than a second, so that afterward he wasn't certain he'd seen it happen at all, only that the wrapper was gone from his palm, and she was 3 feet back into the chicory where the ditch dropped off toward the culvert. He didn't move toward her. He'd learned that much in the first 10 minutes, if not in the 40 years before them. Moving toward something wild only taught it that the fence line wasn't safe either. Then the screen door at the rental house banged a second time, farther off, and something in her shoulders changed. Some readiness he recognized from men who'd spent time listening for footsteps in places they weren't supposed to be, and she was gone before he could get a single word up out of his chest. Not a run exactly, a folding away, quick and low, through the chicory and the dead grass and the gap in the fence wire where a post had rotted out 2 summers back and he'd never gotten around to fixing it. He stood there a while in the settling dust and the smell of hot metal and cut weeds, and let the quiet come back into the field the way it always did after something startled it. That was when he saw the shoe. It sat upright in the flattened grass, almost polite about it, the way a child might leave a shoe by a door, except there was only the one, a girl's sneaker, small, the kind of pink gone gray with washing, with a Velcro strap instead of laces, sized for a foot younger than the one he'd have guessed belonged to her. Not a pair he'd seen on any child in the county, not from the school pickup line on 9, not from the Baptist church rummage bins, not from anywhere he could place, and he'd spent enough years cataloging what belonged and what didn't in a junkyard to trust that instinct absolutely. He didn't touch it right away either. He crouched over it a long moment, hands on his knees, the way he'd crouch over a part he didn't recognize pulled from an engine that had no business having it, turning the mystery over without lifting it, letting his eyes do the first work. Then he picked it up, careful, the way he'd pick up something that might still be evidence of something, though he couldn't yet have said of what, and he carried it back across the lot past the stacked axles and the burn barrel and into the shop. And he set it down on the workbench under the drop light, next to the wrench he'd left mid-turn an hour before. He looked at it there for a long time, longer than the thing seemed to deserve. And even after he made himself walk away from it, to close up, to check the gate chain twice instead of once, some part of him stayed standing at that bench, looking down at one small shoe, with no match anywhere in his memory of the town. The next morning, he drove into town for reasons he told himself were about a fuel filter, though the filter could have waited a week and he knew it. He stopped at the diner first, the one with the sign missing its second E, and took his coffee at the counter instead of the corner booth he usually kept, close enough to the waitress to ask without making it a question that mattered. She was refilling ketchup bottles, unhurried, and he asked her, flat, the way he'd ask about a part number, whether she'd seen a girl around 7 or 8, dark hair, quiet. The waitress didn't look up right away. Said no. Said she'd remember a kid like that. This town didn't have enough kids left in it for one to go unnoticed. Then she did look up, and there was something in her face that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite worry, just the look of someone filing a thing away without knowing why yet. He got the same answer at the gas station from the clerk who'd worked the register 11 years and prided himself on knowing every face that came through, regular or not. No barefoot kids, no new families with kids. He almost let it drop there. Would have let it drop there on any other day, but the clerk added it unprompted, the way people do when a question opens a door they didn't know was shut. Said the only new folks he could think of were the ones renting the Hollis place, 2 roads over, out past the water tower, and even that wasn't really new. 6 weeks, maybe. A woman who kept to herself, said she was somebody's cousin come to help with a kid while the mother worked something out. The clerk hadn't seen the kid himself, hadn't seen the woman more than twice, gas and cigarettes, cash only, gone before the register spit the receipt. He said it easy, like it wasn't anything. The kind of arrangement small towns absorbed without asking questions, because asking questions wasn't neighborly. He thanked him and left before the thanking sounded like more than it was. Driving back, he took the long way, past the Hollis place without meaning to, or telling himself he didn't mean to. The house sat back off the road behind a stand of dead cedars, aluminum siding gone the color of old teeth, a single window unit humming in the front room, curtains drawn against a heat that hadn't broken in 3 weeks. No toys in the yard, no bicycle dropped in the grass, no chalk on the walk, none of the small evidence a child leaves scattered behind her without thinking. Just the closed curtains and the low, steady hum of the unit, and a car in the drive he didn't recognize. Plates too far away to read at the speed he was going, and he didn't stop, didn't slow more than a man slows out of habit at a curve he's driven 1,000 times. He didn't say anything to anyone that night about where he'd been. He fed the shop cat, checked the gate chain, and set the small shoe back on the bench where the light could still find it. The bench light stayed on longer than it needed to. He sat under it with a coffee gone cold an hour ago, the shoe in front of him like something that might still speak if he waited long enough, and he let himself go back because there was no chain or gate strong enough to keep a man out of his own memory. 3 years. He counted it the way he counted everything now. Not in seasons, but in the specific weight of nights. She had been a school nurse for 22 years, the kind who kept butterscotch candies in her desk drawer for the kids who came in saying their stomach hurt, when it was really their house that hurt, the kind who could tell a real fever from a fake one by pressing 2 fingers to a wrist before she ever reached for a thermometer. She used to say children told the truth in their pulses even when their mouths lied. He hadn't understood then why that mattered to her so much. He understood it now, sitting with a bandaged shoe under a shop light, more than he wanted to. She had gotten sick in March, some ordinary word for it at first, and then a worse word, and then a word with numbers attached to it that no engine, no money, no set of hands could outwork. He had tried anyway. He'd sold the second truck. He'd driven her 4 hours each, way to a specialist in the city who spoke to them both like they were slow, and he had sat in waiting rooms turning his wedding ring in slow half circles until the metal was warm, and none of it moved the numbers. Strength had built the whole yard around him, board by board, engine by engine, and Strength had done nothing at her bedside except let him hold on tighter to a hand that was already leaving. She died in October, on a day so ordinary he still resented it. No storm, no sign, just an overcast Tuesday, and a nurse he didn't know pulling a sheet up too gently, like gentleness mattered any more. After that, he had made himself a rule, quiet and private, and never spoken aloud to another soul. He would not reach for things he couldn't finish holding. Not causes, not strangers' children, not fates spinning along tracks he had no say in laying. He had broken that rule exactly never, not for the meth-thin woman who used to walk the frontage road, not for the boy 2 farms over who flinched at engine backfires, not for anyone. Until a barefoot girl stood at his fence line with a strip of gauze at her wrist and asked him a question no child should have needed to ask. He turned the shoe over once more under the light, studying the mismatched lace the way his wife used to study a pulse, looking for the truth underneath. Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet, and somewhere down the frontage road a car passed slow, then slower, then didn't pass at all. He set the shoe down on the workbench, laces still uncrossed, and went to the window because the car that hadn't passed was sitting now with its lights off at the bend where the frontage road curved toward the county line. He watched it for the length of time it took his coffee to go cold, and when it finally rolled forward and away, taillights shrinking into the dark like something retreating rather than leaving, he understood that whatever was happening here had a shape to it, a schedule, rules he wasn't being told. She came back at dusk 2 days later. He was stacking transmission housings along the fence when he felt her before he saw her, the particular stillness of a person trying to be a shadow. She stood closer than before, near enough that he could see the gauze had been changed, cleaner now, tighter, wound by someone who knew what they were doing, which unsettled him more than if it had been dirty. The sky behind her had gone the color of a bruise healing, orange bleeding into purple, and the heat of the day was finally letting go of the dirt in slow, visible waves. "You're back," he said. Not a question, setting down the housing he was carrying. She didn't answer that. She looked at the shoe on the workbench through the open shop door, the mismatched lace catching the last of the light, and something in her face tightened and released so fast. He almost missed it. "What's your name?" he said. "I'm not supposed to talk to people here." He turned the words over. Not "I don't talk to strangers." The ordinary shyness of a child raised right. Not "I'm shy," or my mom says. A rule, recited flat, the way a person recites something drilled into them until it stopped sounding like a sentence and started sounding like a fact of weather. Here. Not "I'm not supposed to talk to people." Here. "That's a strange way to put it," he said, keeping his voice level, the way he'd once kept it level for spooked horses, and for men coming down off things they shouldn't have gone up on. "Here, like this place, or here, like this town." She looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment he saw the machinery behind her eyes working, weighing an answer against a consequence he could not see the size of. "I have to go," she said instead, and stepped back from the fence, one bare foot finding a strip of gravel and not flinching from it, which told him something about calluses and something about practice. "Wait," he said, and she didn't wait, but she didn't run either. She walked, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of someone who had been told exactly how fast was safe. He stood at the fence long after she'd gone, the gravel dust settling, the cicadas starting up again as if a held breath had finally let go, and he thought about the word "here" the way his wife used to think about a lab result, turning it, looking for what it wasn't saying. He didn't try the fence again that night. Instead, he went to the shed, found the plastic crate where his wife had kept things for the church food drive years back, before the drive stopped needing her, and he set a paper plate on the old stump at the fence line. the one the previous owner had left when he cleared the fence row, too heavy to move, good for nothing except this. On the plate, he put a peanut butter sandwich, cut corner to corner the way his daughter used to like it, before she got too old for corners, and a bottle of water with the cap loosened just enough that small hands could finish the job. He did not wait to see if she came. He had learned that much at least in 61 years of watching skittish things. That watching was its own kind of trap. In the morning, the plate was empty, licked clean at the corners, and set back exactly where he'd left it, squared to the edge of the stump like she'd measured it. He didn't say anything about it. He made another sandwich the next evening, added a granola bar still in its wrapper, and left it at dusk when the light went copper and the yard shadows stretched long enough to hide a man's face if he stood just right. This time he saw her at the tree line, waiting, and he did not look at her straight on. He'd learned that too, from horses and from men. And he set the plate down and walked back to the porch and sat. And after a while she came and ate and left the wrapper folded into a small square on the stump, which struck him as a thing no one taught a child to do unless somebody had once punished her for waste. On the third evening he added the bandage roll, still sealed, and a blanket folded into a tight square, army style, the kind of fold he hadn't done since Da Nang, and hadn't forgotten since either. He left them beside the food without a word. She took all of it. The blanket was gone the next morning, and so was the bandage roll, though the wrapper it came in was found later, tucked into the fence wire like a flag someone had run up and then thought better of. He began to notice himself watching the clock in the afternoons the way he used to watch it before a supply run, some old readiness surfacing in him that he didn't examine too closely, because examining it felt like naming something he wasn't ready to name. He told himself it was food. He told himself it was a blanket against the nights, which had started turning cool the way they did in this country when September leaned into October. He did not tell himself yet that he was building something, but on the fourth evening, when he set the plate down, he noticed his hands were steadier than they'd been in years, and he did not know what to make of that either. On the fifth evening, the light went the color of weak tea, and she came to the fence sooner than usual, before the shadows of the crushed trucks had finished stretching across the gravel. She had gotten careless, or tired, or both. The gauze on her left wrist had loosened at the edge where she must have rewrapped it herself, working the roll around with her right hand and her teeth the way a person does who has had no one to help her for a long time. He saw the wrap sag. He saw her notice it sag half a second after he did, and her hand came up fast to press it back into place, but not fast enough. He had time to see the skin beneath. It was not the mottled yellow-green of an old bruise, not the raised pink seam of a scrape gone to scar. It was cleaner than that, straighter, a shape pressed into her, not onto her. Small marks in a line, deliberate as typeface. The kind of thing a hand does slowly and with a tool, not the kind of thing that happens to a child who trips on a porch step. He had cut men out of wreckage in a country where he'd learned to read skin the way other men read weather, and what he was looking at did not belong to any accident he had ever pulled a person free of. He did not say anything. He had learned, these past days, that saying anything too fast was the surest way to lose her, the way you lose a bird by reaching when you should be waiting. She pulled the gauze back over it with the practiced quickness of someone who had done this before, many times, in front of many people who were not supposed to see. Her eyes came up to his, checking, the way you check a door, to see if it's about to open on you. "It's from before," she said. Flat, final. A sentence built to close a subject, not open one. "Okay," he said. She studied him a moment longer, as if surprised the door had not swung wider, and something in. Her shoulders came down half an inch, the smallest release. Then she reached for the plate. He watched her walk back toward the tree line with the food balanced in both hands, careful, the way a person carries something that has to last, The gauze had gone crooked again already, riding low on her wrist bone, and he made himself look away from it before she caught him looking. That night he sat a long time on the porch step without the dog and without the radio, turning the shape over in his mind the way he used to turn over a jammed mechanism, searching by feel for what he wasn't yet permitted to see clearly. He thought of ledgers. He thought, without wanting to, of livestock tags, of the ugly, efficient logic of marking something you intend to keep track of. He told himself he was wrong. He did not believe himself. In the morning, he called a number he had not dialed in 4 years, written in pencil on the inside cover of a phone book he kept for no reason he could name, except that some numbers you don't delete. The man who answered had gone gray at the temples, same as him, had done 2 tours in the same unit, had stood beside him at a funeral in a rented suit that didn't fit either of them. Now he wore a sheriff's deputy star in the next county over, and a voice that had learned over the years how to sound patient about things that weren't. He told him what he'd seen: the bare feet, the gauze, always crooked, always reapplied like a habit rather than a wound left to heal. The way she flinched from questions, the way other people flinched from a hand raised too fast. He did not say the word he was thinking. He let the deputy get there on his own. There was a long quiet on the line, the kind that meant the man on the other end was doing the same arithmetic he had done the night before, turning it over, feeling for the edges of it. "You got a name," the deputy said. Not quite a question. "No." "A guardian. Somebody I can knock on a door and talk to." "No." "You seen anybody hurt her? Anybody put a hand on her?" "No." Another pause, longer this time, and in it he could hear the deputy exhale through his nose, the sound of a man rubbing at his own eyes with his free hand. "Look," the deputy said, and his voice had gone soft in the way voices go soft right before they deliver something you don't want. "I believe you. I believe what you're seeing bothers you, and it should. But I can't open a file on a bandage. I can't send a car out on a kid standing at a fence line if there's no name attached and no complaint filed and no crime I can point to. You know how this works. I need something I can put a number on." "A number," he repeated, and the word sat wrong in his mouth, tasted like the thing he'd been turning over half the night: tags and ledgers and the ugly arithmetic of keeping track. "A case number. That's how it starts. Without it, I got nothing to hang a warrant on, nothing to knock on a door with. I'm sorry. I wish it was different." The deputy's voice cracked just slightly at the edge, an old friend's voice, not a lawman's. "Call me the second something changes. The second you got a name, a bruise you can point to, anything. I'll move fast. I promise you that." He said he would. He hung up the phone and stood a while in the kitchen with his hand still resting on the receiver, listening to the refrigerator hum and the dog's tail thump once against the floor, and understanding, with the flat certainty of a man reading a gauge he'd read 1,000 times before, that whatever was going to happen here was going to happen without permission from anyone wearing a badge. He drove into town anyway because sitting in the kitchen with the dog's tail thumping against the floor felt like a slow drowning, and there was a diner on Route 9 that had been open since before he'd bought the yard, a place with a hand-painted sign and a screen door that never quite closed right, and the woman who ran it had been pouring coffee for drifters and truckers and lost men for 30 years without asking a single one of them what they were running from. She was 70-some now, small in the shoulders, hair the color of ash, and she moved behind the counter with the economy of someone who had worn a groove into the linoleum decades ago and never needed to look down to know where her feet would land. She set a cup in front of him without being asked. She'd been doing that since his wife died, since before that even, since he was younger and angrier, and still believed the world owed him an explanation. He didn't plan to say anything, but the coffee sat between his hands going cold, and the words came out of him low and plain: the rented house off County Road 4, the chain link, the flag hung crooked on the porch, and her face didn't change while he talked. Not the way most faces changed. No widening of the eyes, no gasp, just a stillness settling over her that he recognized because he wore the same stillness himself. Girl about 10, she said. Not a question. Maybe younger, hard to tell. She set down the pot. There was a girl at that house last spring. Her voice didn't rise. Different look to her then, heavier. Hair down past her shoulders, dyed some, I thought, lighter than it should have been for that skin. She wiped a spot on the counter that didn't need wiping. I remember because she ate like she hadn't in a while and didn't say 4 words the whole time, and the man with her paid cash and didn't want a receipt. Same man? Couldn't say. Could have been. Men like that don't stick in your memory the way the kids do. She looked at him then, and something in her face had gone the particular gray of a woman who has fed too many people passing through and learned to read what they weren't saying. You're telling me this because you think it's happened before. I think she's been somewhere else before that house. Moved. Changed up some. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the saucer. Heavier, longer hair. That's not growing up. That's covering tracks. The old woman didn't say anything for a while. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway, and the screen door rattled on its hinge from the wind of it passing. 30 years I've fed everybody who walked in that door and never asked why they looked the way they looked, she said finally. I always told myself that was kindness. She looked at him hard. Maybe it was just easier. He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. He finished the coffee he didn't want and left money on the counter. She tried to wave off, and when he stood to go, she caught his sleeve briefly, her grip surprising him with its strength. Find her, she said, whoever she is. Find her before he moves her again. He stopped at the door because her grip hadn't loosened, and something in the way she held him there told him she wasn't finished. There was a girl in 91, she said. Younger than this one, I think. Skinnier. Wore the same dress 3 days running until I gave her one of mine off the line out back. She let go of his sleeve slow, like the releasing cost her something. She used to sit right there. She nodded at the corner booth, the one with the vinyl gone dark and split at the seam. Wouldn't eat unless I sat with her. Wouldn't talk unless the radio was on, like she needed something else in the room making noise. He waited. The fan overhead ticked on its bearing, one beat behind the second hand of the clock above the register. I called it in, she said. Took me 2 weeks to work up to it, and by then I'd half convinced myself I was imagining things, the way you do when a thing's ugly enough. But I called. County sent a woman out, real polite, real full of forms. Her mouth tightened at the corner. 2 days later, they put that girl right back where she'd come from. Said the home checked out. Said I'd misread things. She looked past him at the window, at the highway beyond it, running white and empty in the heat. I never saw her again. Asked around for years. Nobody had an answer, or nobody wanted to give me one. You don't know what happened to her. No. The word came out flat, worn smooth from having been said before, maybe only to herself in the empty hours after closing. I know what I imagine happened. That's worse, most nights, than knowing. He thought of the girl's wrist, the gauze gone soft and gray from handling, and the number beneath it, and he understood then why the old woman's caution sat the way it did. Not timid, not indifferent, but scarred over in the specific shape of a failure she'd never gotten to make right. Institutions had already had their turn with her once. She had watched what they were capable of up close, and it had cost her a name she still carried around unspoken 30 years on. That's why I'm not calling anybody first, he said. I know it, she said. That's why I told you. She wiped her hands on her apron, an old habit with nothing to wipe. But you go and do it alone, and it goes wrong. That's on you the rest of your life. I'm telling you that too. The screen door swung shut behind him with its tired hinge groan, and the gravel lot threw heat up through his boots as he crossed to the truck, and he sat a long minute with the key in the ignition, unturned, thinking about a dress worn 3 days running and a booth that still, 30 years later, nobody liked to sit in. He didn't go home. He told himself he would, told himself. The truck knew the way back to his own driveway better than it knew any other road in the county, and then he found himself easing past the turnoff for his own gate and continuing on, headlights off a half-mile before the rented house, running dark the way he used to run dark in another life, in another country, for reasons that had nothing to do with a girl's wrist. The house sat back from the road the way it always did, unremarkable, the kind of place a man could drive past 10,000 times and never once think about twice. 11:40 by the dash clock. No moon worth mentioning, just a smear of cloud over a three-quarter sky, and the temperature had dropped enough that his breath ghosted faint against the windshield when he cut the engine and let the truck roll the last 20 yards on nothing but momentum and gravity. Downstairs, a light. Kitchen, maybe, or what passed for a front room, and in it, a shape. He watched the shape for a long time. It did not pace. That was the detail that stayed with him later, turning it over. It did not pace, did not startle, did not do any of the things a nervous man does in a house he doesn't want watched. It stood at the window with the stillness of something that had learned stillness the hard way, the same stillness he'd seen in the girl herself. And it was that echo that put a cold thread down the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the temperature. Controlled, watching the road, the way a man watches a road when he already expects, some day, for someone to be watching back. Upstairs, one window burned yellow behind a curtain that didn't move. Not once the whole time he sat there. No draft stirred it, no hand brushed it aside to check the dark. He noted, the way he'd once noted a wire running wrong across a door frame, that the fabric hung too flat against the frame for a curtain that was only pinned. There was a stiffness to the top edge, a rigidity that curtains didn't have on their own. Nailed shut, he thought, not closed. Nailed. He sat with that a long while, the engine ticking as it cooled, his hands loose on the wheel, and he did not go up the drive, did not cut the dark with his own light, did not do anything at all that a man could later swear to under oath as trespass or threat. He only looked, the way he'd learned young to look at a thing before deciding whether it could kill him, and the shape in the downstairs window looked back toward the road once, just once, long enough that he could not have said afterward whether it saw the truck or only sensed, the way animals sense weather, that something out past the fence line had changed. Then he backed out slow, lights still off, and did not breathe right again until the rented house was a shape in the mirror, and not a fact he had to hold in both hands. She came in daylight 3 days later, which was itself a kind of alarm, because everything about her until then had belonged to dusk and dust, and the hours when the yard's shadows ran long enough to hide a small body moving along the fence. He was under the hood of a '78 Fairlane when he heard the gravel change rhythm. Not the crunch of a car, not the shuffle of the dog, but a child's tread trying and failing to be quiet. And when he straightened up, she was already inside the gate, standing in the flat white middle of the yard, where the sun found every seam in her clothes and every hollow in her face. She was shaking, not from cold. August had the yard at 91 degrees by 9 in the morning, heat coming up off the scrap metal in visible waves, and still she stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, like she was holding her own ribs in place. He set the wrench down on the fender, slow, the way he'd learned to move around anything skittish. "You don't have to," he said, because he'd guessed already what she'd come to do, the same way he'd guessed the nailed curtain, the same way, see how a man reads weather in the color of the sky before the radio catches up to it. She didn't answer. She walked to him instead, 5 steps, 6, and stopped close enough that he could see the fine dirt ground into the creases of her knuckles, and then she turned her arm over and peeled the gauze back herself this time, no flinching away from his hand, no need for him to hold anything steady. She did it herself in daylight, in front of him, like she'd decided something in the night that she needed the sun as a witness to. The wrap came away in a slow unrolling, and what was underneath was not what he had let himself half hope for. Not a burn, not a break-healing wrong, not any accident a body could suffer on its own. It was carved, not inked, not stained, cut in lines too straight and too deliberate to be anything but done on purpose, done with care, done the way a man numbers a crate before shipping it. A number first, small, tucked close to the base of her palm. Then 2 letters beside it, capital, evenly spaced, healed over pale and shining like the skin had been told to grow back quiet. Not her name. He understood that before she said anything at all. A name a person kept. This was something a person was given, the way a lot number is given, the way a shelf position is given, so that whoever came looking would know which house, which room, which child. She held her arm out to him a moment longer than she needed to, and did not cover it back up. "Are you going to send me back?" she said. "Before dark." He did not answer right away because the honest answer was he did not know. And a man who had spent 40 years reading engine trouble by ear had learned never to speak before he understood the problem. So he crouched instead, bringing his eyes level with the mark instead of looking down at it, and he asked the only question that seemed to matter. "What's it stand for?" She looked at the fence line before she looked at him, the way a person checks a door before answering in a low voice. "The house," she said. "So they know where I go back to." He asked her nothing else. He let the silence hold the shape of an open hand, and after a while, the way water finds a crack, she kept talking. She had been called 3 different names, she said, in 3 different houses, none of them the one on whatever paper existed somewhere with her birth on it. A woman's name once, a child's nickname another time, soft and sweet, and meant, she understood now, to make her easy to love quickly and hand over just as quickly. The current house did not use a name much at all. Mostly it used the number. 4, she said, touching it lightly, not with shame, but with the flat certainty of a fact recited too many times to carry feeling any more. There were 3 before me, in that house, marked like this. He felt something in his chest do a thing he did not have a word for, something between a door slamming and a door finally opening. "Where are they now?" he said. "The other 3." She shrugged, and the shrug was the worst thing he had seen all summer, worse than the carving itself, because a child should not have a shrug that practiced, that empty of hope attached to the question. "Moved on," she said. "That's what they say when somebody goes. Moved on." The heat pressed down on the yard the way it always did at that hour, thick and yellow and indifferent, and somewhere behind them a hawk turned once over the ridge and did not come down. He thought of every crate he had ever loaded onto every truck bed on this property, every lot number stenciled in white paint, so a part could be tracked from tear down to sale. And he thought that he had spent his whole life understanding inventory systems without once imagining a man would build one out of children. "Who does the carving?" he said, and his voice came out lower than he meant it to. She did not answer that one. She only pulled the gauze back over her wrist, slow, careful, the way a person closes a book they are not finished reading, and looked at him with the flat, waiting patience of someone who had asked a question first and was still owed her answer. "Are you going to send me back?" she said again. "Before dark?" He did not answer right away. He had built a whole life on not answering right away, on letting silence do the work that words could not be trusted to do. And for 30 years, that habit had served him the way a good latch serves a gate, quietly, without needing to be noticed. But she was still looking at him, and the hawk had not come back down, and the gauze on her wrist sat loose now, already loosening again in the heat. Like the others did, she said, when he did not speak. Not a question this time. A fact she was laying down beside the first one, the way a person sets a second card on the table to show they are not bluffing. They always waited till dark. Horse said it was easier for everybody. He thought of 100 small mercies he had told himself he was granting people by minding his own business. Not asking why a truck came at midnight to the Hollis place. Not asking why the Ferris girl stopped riding the bus in October and started again in March, thinner, quieter, wearing sleeves in June. He had called it respect. He understood now, standing in his own yard with the sun going copper over the fence line, that he had only ever called it that to keep his hands clean. No, he said. The word came out of him plain, without weight, the way a man says it who has not yet understood what he has committed himself to. She blinked once, slow, and something moved behind her eyes that was not quite hope. Hope would have been too loud a thing for a face that had trained itself so carefully out of wanting, but it was close to hope's shadow, the cool place hope leaves behind when it has been gone a long time and is only now testing whether the ground will hold it again. You don't know what you're saying, she told him, and it was not cruelty in her voice, only the flat report of someone who had been promised things before by people who meant them in the moment. I know exactly what I'm saying. He heard how it sounded, a man of 61 years standing in a gravel lot full of stripped engines, making a vow to a child he had known for 4 days, and he did not take it back. He had spent his whole working life reading serial numbers stamped into steel, matching one broken thing to the paperwork that proved where it came from and where it was meant to go. And he understood, looking at the raw mark healing under her gauze, that this was the same kind of reading, only the steel this time was a girl, and the paperwork did not exist, and somebody had decided that was the point. The hawk finally dropped toward the ridge and was gone. Somewhere down the county road, faint enough that he might have imagined it, an engine turned over and idled, waiting on someone. He weighed the two roads the way he used to weigh a bent frame against a straight one, looking for the hairline crack that would tell him which was salvageable and which would fail under load. The county sheriff's number was in his phone, had been there for years, unused. A name attached to a badge attached to a man he had met twice at a fundraiser breakfast and did not trust to move faster than paperwork allowed. He knew how these things went when they went through the front door. A call, a report, a case number, a caseworker with 40 files on her desk, and a girl handed back into whatever house had taught her to stop giving her real name, because the house had an address and a lease and a man's signature on it, and she had nothing but a scar and a story nobody official had verified yet. He looked at her standing by the fence, gauze taped crooked at her wrist, sneakers that did not match, and he made the choice the way a man steps off a roof he has already started falling from. Get in the truck. She did not move at first. Then she did, the way she did everything, like she was testing the floor before trusting it with her weight. He drove her the 4 miles to his house with both hands on the wheel and the windows down and the radio off, aware the whole way of what this looked like from outside the cab. A grown man, a child, not his own, no papers, no call made first. Aware that somewhere down the line a lawyer could stand up and call it exactly what it resembled. He did not slow down. He had spent 61 years staying out of other people's business because business, once you were in it, did not let you back out clean, and he understood now, gravel ticking under the tires, that this was the day the rule broke, and that there would be no unbroken version of himself to go back to afterward. The house came up gray and low against the flat light. He cut the engine. You're not sending me back. It was not a question this time. No. She looked at him a long moment, reading him the way he had been reading her for 4 days, and then she reached for the door handle herself before he could open it for her and stepped down onto his gravel like it was ground. She had decided for now to trust. He called from the porch, phone against his ear, watching her through the screen door where she sat on the couch with her knees drawn up, The mismatched sneaker set beside her like something she needed within reach. "I've got the photograph now," he said. "Wrist, clear as anything. And I've got her, sitting right here, telling it to me straight." The deputy was quiet long enough that he thought the call had dropped. "You understand what you're asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to write it down." "I write it down. It's not a favor anymore. It's a file." Files get looked at by people who don't know you, don't know her, don't care what your gut tells you. A breath on the line, static and tired. "Send me the picture." He sent it. He heard the small chime on the other end, a pause that felt longer than it was. "That's a number," the deputy said finally, voice flatter now. "Not a scar, not an accident. That's somebody's inventory." "I know what it is." "Then you know what happens if it doesn't hold. 24 hours. That's what I can buy you before this goes up the chain, whether either of us wants it to. If her story shifts, if the marking gets explained away by some family member with a story of their own, if a judge decides this was a man off the street who took a child out of a yard without so much as a phone call first." He stopped himself. "You're not her father. You're not her uncle. You're a man with a salvage yard and a photograph. That's a hard thing to stand behind in a courtroom." "I'm not asking to stand behind anything. I'm asking you to look at what's on her wrist." "I am looking at it. That's why I'm telling you what I'm telling you." The deputy's voice dropped softer, almost apology. 24 hours. I start asking questions quiet. After that, it's not quiet anymore. And if this doesn't hold, they'll ask why a man your age with your history had a missing child in his truck and no call logged for 6 hours. He didn't answer that. Through the screen, he could see her watching him now, still and unblinking, the way she watched everything, like she was grading whether he'd flinch. 24 hours, he said. I'll have more than a photograph by then. He ended the call and stood a moment with the phone warm in his hand, the yard gone gold and long shadowed behind him, and understood that the clock the deputy had just started was the only clock that mattered now. He made one more call. It was not a call he made lightly. 22 years he had run the yard on the same principle that ran through everything else he owned. You handle what's yours, you don't hand your weight to another man's back. But the deputy's clock was already ticking somewhere behind his ribs, and 24 hours was not a length of time, it was a door closing. He scrolled to a number he had not used in 11 months and pressed call. "I need the yard watch tonight," he said. No preamble, the way the club had always talked to each other when something mattered. "Not for me, for a kid." He didn't explain the wrist, he didn't have to. He said marked and rented house and 41 hours since the deputy started counting, and on the other end there was a silence that was not hesitation, but calculation, a man doing the same math he had just done. "How many you need?" "However many'll come." They came before dark. He heard them before he saw them. The low building thunder of it rolling up the county road, engine after engine peeling off the highway like a weather front arriving on schedule. And then they were turning in through the gate in twos and threes, headlights cutting long across the gravel, until the lot that had held nothing but rust and dead trucks for 20 years was full of leather and chrome and the low, idle growl of men who had ridden 2, 3 hours without being asked why. 41 by the time they stopped coming. They didn't crowd the porch. They didn't ask to see her. They took up positions the way men who'd spent years standing perimeter still knew how to take up positions. Some at the tree line, some down by the gate, two older ones with gray in their beards walking the fence line slow, reading it the way he had taught himself to read fence lines, looking for the places a small body had pressed through. A handful peeled off toward town in quiet pairs, engines idling low past the gas station, past the church, past the rented house with its gravel drive and its drawn curtains, not stopping, just passing, just looking. the way men look who intend to remember every detail of a place they may need to come back to. He stood on the porch step with his hand resting on the rail and watched his yard fill with men who had not asked him a single question about whether this was his business to make theirs. Inside, through the screen, she had gone still at the window, watching the lights sweep the yard, and he saw, for the first time since she'd come through his fence, something in her face that was not fear. It was disbelief. The deputy's truck door made a sound he would remember later, a single flat click of the latch catching, ordinary as any door anywhere, except that it came at 11:14 by the porch clock, and it was the sound that meant the waiting had a shape now, an hour, a location, a set of headlights moving toward a gravel drive 3 miles east, while 41 men stood in his yard, doing nothing at all, which was its own kind of doing. She had come out onto the porch by then, barefoot on boards he'd meant to replace 2 summers running, and she was holding a mug of cocoa he'd made her with hands that didn't know how to make cocoa for a child. Too much powder, not enough stirred in, and she wasn't drinking it. She held it the way a person holds a thing to have something to hold, both palms wrapped around the ceramic, knuckles pale, the liquid inside gone still and skinned over and untouched. The radio on his hip crackled low, a deputy's voice flattened by distance and static, confirming what they already knew from the way the lights had stopped sweeping the yard and turned instead toward the paved road, moving in. 2 words. He didn't repeat them out loud. He didn't have to. The men nearest the porch went quiet in the specific way men go quiet when they're listening for something underneath the thing being said. She looked up at him then, and her bare feet shifted on the boards, weight rocking heel to toe, a child's habit, the only childish thing about her in that moment. "Is it happening?" she said, not a question shaped like a question, a statement asking to be told it was true. "It's happening," he said. She nodded once and looked down into the cocoa she wasn't drinking, and for a long moment the only sound was wind moving through the fence line, and somewhere behind the house an engine ticking as it cooled. "My name," she said, so quietly he almost missed it under the wind, "isn't the number. I know. It's—" And she said it then, small and plain, and hers, a name he would carry the rest of his life and would never once say aloud to another living soul unless she gave him leave, and the saying of it seemed to cost her something, and to give her something back in the same breath, the way a held door finally opens both ways. Behind them, down the dark road, red and blue light began to climb the tree line like a slow dawn, arriving 3 hours early. The lights did not stop climbing for a long time. By the second morning, the man from the rented house had a name of his own, printed under a booking photograph that showed him blinking, ordinary, the kind of face that could sell you insurance or fix your roof and never once make you look twice. He said little. He hired a lawyer who said less. The county paper ran 4 column inches on page 3, the way it always did with things too large for the town to hold. And the biker read it twice at the counter of the diner and then folded it small and put it in his jacket, not to keep, just to stop looking at it. By the 4th day, 2 more names surfaced, 2 counties over, a boy of 9 and a girl who would not say her age, both found in houses rented the same careless way, both carrying on their skin the same small mark scratched into the same place. A private ledger written in scar tissue across 3 counties by a man who had thought no one would ever read it as writing. The number on her wrist had not been a cruelty invented once. It was a system. A system needs more than one entry to be a system, and now there were 3, and the word that moved through the sheriff's department was not incident anymore but operation, and the word that moved through the club, quieter, was relief mixed with a grief none of them named. Relief that it was over, grief that it had ever needed a name at all. She went, in the 2nd week, to live with an aunt the caseworkers had found and vetted and driven 6 hours to meet, A woman with her mother's same tired eyes and none of her mother's silences. A woman who cried once in the kitchen doorway and then did not cry again where the girl could see. The paperwork took its time, the way paperwork does, indifferent to what it is deciding. But it came back in the end with his name on a line he had not expected to see his name on. Supervised visitation granted, the ink still faintly wet-looking under the fluorescent office light, and he stood there holding it the way a man holds something he has been told is his and does not yet believe. He drove home past the fence line that evening. He did not stop, but he looked the way a man looks at a door he has been told will open again and did not yet trust the hinge. The seasons turned the way seasons do, without asking permission of anyone's healing. Summer folded into a fall that stripped the cottonwoods along the fence line bare in a week of hard wind. And then winter came down flat and gray over the yard, and he kept the visits the court had allowed. One Saturday a month, driven the way a man drives to church he isn't sure he believes in any more but goes anyway. She used her name now, not the one the caseworkers had typed onto forms in the early days, careful and clinical, but the real one, the one her aunt said soft in the mornings and did not flinch saying, the one that had waited under gauze and silence for longer than any child should have to wait for a name to be safe to answer to. She said it herself the first time, standing in her aunt's kitchen doorway with her hair combed different than he'd ever seen it, and he had to look away for a second before he trusted his face. On her windowsill, her aunt told him once, not making a thing of it, sat a single sneaker, mismatched, the left one worn through at the toe, the mate to it never recovered from wherever the other house had scattered its evidence. The girl kept it there the way other children kept stuffed animals. Nobody asked her to explain it. Nobody tried to replace it with a matching pair. Word travels in small counties the way water travels downhill, finding the low ground without being told to. The sheriff's department started calling him direct, skipping the dispatch line when a call came in about a child too quiet at a gas station, a kid flinching wrong at a school pickup, a girl at a laundromat who wouldn't look up from her shoes. Nobody made it official. There was no badge, no card with his name on it. Just a phone number passed hand to hand, the way the club's number had once been passed to a woman in a kitchen who needed 41 men to show up before dark. He went when they called. He stood in doorways and parking lots the way he'd once stood at a fence line, patient, unhurried, letting silence do the work that questions couldn't. Sometimes there was nothing under the surface. Sometimes there was everything. He did not tell himself he had become someone new. He told himself, when he thought about it at all, that he had simply stopped looking away, and that this, more than any patch or any year on a bike, was the only kind of insurance a man like him had ever really earned. She came back in June, the way she had the summer before, riding in the bed of her uncle's truck with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on them, watching the salvage yard rise up out of the heat shimmer, like something she had dreamed once and needed to check was still real. She was 12 now, taller, the kind of taller that made old men notice how fast a year could move once a child was finally safe enough to grow into it. She did not flinch when he set a crate down hard behind her. She did not flinch when the dog barked at a delivery truck, or when a torch caught in the back bay and threw a long orange spark across the gravel. She had stopped flinching sometime in the last year, quietly, the way a bruise stops being tender before anyone notices it's healed. She sat on the porch rail like she owned a piece of it. Her wrist rested easy on the wood, sleeve pushed up without thought, the old scar pale and puckered and no longer covered by anything. He looked at it the way he always did, not long, not searching, just a glance that confirmed it was still there and still hers to show or not show. Still ugly, she said, following his eyes, almost smiling. Ugly things last, he said. That's usually why they're still around to look at. She laughed, short and real, and went back to peeling a strip of bark off a stick she'd picked up from somewhere he hadn't seen. He sat down beside her, joints complaining the way they always did now, and looked out at the rows of dead cars rusting patiently in the sun, at the fence line where a barefoot girl had once stood so still he'd nearly driven past her twice. He had spent most of his life believing that staying out of it was a kind of discipline, a rule, something a man built to keep himself steady. He understood now that it had only ever kept him steady. It had never done a single thing for anyone standing on the other side of the fence, waiting to see if he'd notice them before dark. The scar on her wrist did not need covering any more. Neither, he thought, did the reason he'd finally looked. He didn't say any of that out loud. She wouldn't have wanted him to. She just sat there in the heat, wrist resting on the rail, watching the yard the way people watch a place that once almost swallowed them whole and